A session on personal development. The following chapter asks you to consider what personal development and the future might look like for you. You are approximately halfway through this program. The beginning of this program seemed too early to properly consider this area, and the end seemed too late. Right here seemed about right. You will get a break from thinking about past harm, so you might imagine considering the future will be much easier. It can be for some, but in our experience, it's not unusual for those who experienced childhood harm to feel uncomfortable with or even resistant to thinking about their future. If this occurs, it's quite common. Group Session 13. What does recovery mean to you? Quote, sometimes I have this fantasy where I have a great life and the people who hurt me show up and they're like, wow, look at her. I deserve to have a life. But sometimes I want to have a life just to piss them all off. End quote. Abby. Thus far, it's been important to spend quite a lot of time reflecting on how the past has impacted your present life. For example, you have explored how childhood trauma relates to painful psychological symptoms, your sense of self, relationship patterns, and post traumatic memories. This chapter focuses less on the effect of trauma or post traumatic reactions and more on post traumatic growth. The focus here is on really understanding your needs and imagining the future you want to create. Cell regeneration as a model of hope. When an individual has lived with the painful effects of past trauma for many years, they can sometimes lose hope that change is possible. But this can become a self-fulfilling prophecy. Pessimism concerning the possibility of change can itself get in the way of changing. Alternatively, belief or hope in the possibility of change supports and encourages change. The human body can act as a source of inspiration concerning the possibility of change. Our entire body is built out of highly specialized cells. These cells are constantly regenerating or renewing themselves. Taste bud cells renew themselves every 10 days. Stomach cells every 2 to 9 days. Skin cells every 10 to 30 days. Red blood cells every 4 months. Liver cells every 6 to 12 months, and so on. And there's evidence that parts of our brain can regenerate as well, including the hippocampus, where memories are stored. On a biological level, we are hardly the same person we were just a while ago. Regrowth or regeneration isn't just a possibility. Concerning our physiology, it's who we are right down to the cellular level. And if we take reasonably good care of our bodies, we can aid this constant process of regrowth. That's what this chapter is about. The idea that change and regrowth are possible, and that by taking care of ourselves, we can aid this process. Michelle never knew her dad, was neglected by her mother, and was sexually abused by several men as a young teen. During a group therapy session, she shared a fascinating thought concerning cell regeneration. Quote, I like the idea that my skin cells regenerate at least every month. Those disgusting men that abused me all those years ago, they touched me then. But this means that they never touched the skin I have today. Sometimes I look at my skin or touch my skin and I think, this is my skin now. End quote. Objects and subjects. Jean-Paul Sartre made what he felt was a critical distinction between objects and subjects in a 1943 publication entitled Being and Nothingness. Sartre was a 20th century existential philosopher, meaning he felt compelled to write about these ideas in a way which is incomprehensible to normal human beings. Reading the fine print, 688 pages of being and nothingness is not a lot of fun for most people. Nevertheless, Sartre's discussion of objects and subjects can have genuine relevance to those who experienced childhood harm. In brief, Sartre said that the world is filled with objects and subjects, and he defines these terms. Objects, for example, are rocks, trees, and very basic animal life. Objects are inanimate or simply react to the environment. If an object changes, this results from processes the object does not direct. As human beings, we are not objects, we are subjects. The critical difference is that human beings possess free will and are capable of envisioning and directing their futures. In other words, we can make genuine choices. But Sartre also made the point that human beings are capable of treating other people as if they were an object. Many people we have worked with, to a greater or lesser extent, got treated as if they were objects. The message they received may have been something like, "You are not free to create your life and determine your future. Other people or circumstances will control you and determine your existence." If a child is treated as an object, they can begin to see themselves as an object. They may begin to imagine they have little capacity to direct their lives. This chapter is an opportunity for you to explore your subjectivity, that especially human part of you that is capable of determining your needs and directing your future. Complex trauma and learned helplessness. Some of the most extraordinary discoveries happen by accident. This was true of learned helplessness, one of the most established and significant concepts in all of psychology. In the 1960s, a young psychologist named Martin Seligman was helping out with some experiments concerning principles of learning. If the idea of using electric shocks on animals is upsetting for you, we are sorry, but it's part of the story. Seligman was involved in experiments where dogs were taught to associate a sound with electric shocks. The dogs were placed on a metal grid next to a short barrier they could easily jump over to escape the shocks. But when these dogs were shocked, they just lay there and suffered rather than trying to escape. This didn't make any sense because the dogs should have quickly figured out that they could escape the shocks by jumping over the barrier. Seligman was confused until he learned that these particular dogs had been used in an earlier experiment where they were repeatedly shocked but had no means of escaping. These dogs had acquired the idea that they were helpless to escape shocks. In the present experiment, they were capable of escaping the shocks, but it didn't occur to them to try because their past experiences had taught them that escaping shocks was impossible. Their past experiences had taught them that they are helpless to control their present circumstances. This is learned helplessness. This experiment was replicated with dogs and other animals many times and showed the same results. More humane research on learned helplessness has been done with children and adults, and the same results were found. People who have been exposed to repeated harmful circumstances tend to develop a pessimistic or depressive view, which leads them to believe that there isn't much they can do to control their lives. Through repeated experiences of childhood abuse and neglect, individuals acquire the idea that they aren't in control of their feelings and lives. Many acquire the idea that they should not bother hoping that change is possible. But this pessimistic perspective is just that, a perspective. It's not necessarily the truth. If the principle of learned helplessness leaves you feeling angry, perhaps that's a good thing. You can use that anger in a healthy and constructive way by deciding that it's up to you to determine how you will see yourself, your life, and the future. As Sartre would say, you're not an object. You're a person who, despite what happened, is still free to determine how you will view yourself, others, and the world. Complex trauma and barriers to personal development. There can be a variety of reasons why change can seem difficult or even impossible for those who experienced childhood harm. Some of the most common reasons we come across are described briefly below. See what you can identify with. 1. Not feeling you deserve to have a good life. The experience of repeated childhood abuse or neglect can impart the message that you don't deserve to have good and intimate relationships, positive feelings about yourself, or personal success. It's difficult for impressionable children to resist such messages, which may endure through their thoughts, feelings, and behaviors in adulthood. In order to access needs and act to get them met, a person has to believe that they deserve to have needs and to get such needs met. Do you believe you deserve to have good feelings about yourself, good relationships, and a good life? 2. Time spent experiencing threats and worry. As we explored earlier, those who experienced childhood harm tend to spend more time in states of fight or flight or shutdown, even when threats are minimal or non existent. Such states are distracting. It's difficult to build a house if you are always focused on preventing one from burning down. Is it hard to focus on your needs and personal development because you spend a lot of time experiencing threats and worrying? 3. Confidence. In a word, what is it that people who experienced childhood harm need most? Of course, there is no single answer. Individuals are too complex for that. However, a good answer for many is confidence. Repeated, noxious childhood experiences tend to knock the confidence out of a person. Confidence that they are good and capable, that they are lovable, that they can make a significant contribution, and that they can create change. Confidence means you are willing to experiment with change, make mistakes, learn and adjust, and put yourself in new situations. Childhood trauma can sap confidence, leaving people stuck in fear and avoidance. Difficulties with self confidence can be associated with Seligman's idea of learned helplessness explored above. Does a lack of confidence get in the way of experimenting with change? 4. Other people in your life. You may be in supportive relationships at this time in your life. However, some people who experienced childhood harm are currently in relationships with people who are not supportive of their personal development. The idea that you will develop yourself and your life may feel threatening to them. Rather than supporting you to heal issues associated with past harm, they may exacerbate such issues. This can make it harder for you to focus on change, which is important. Is this issue relevant to you? 5. Change evokes anxiety. The very idea of change can evoke anxiety. Some can worry that if they start accessing their needs for love, self expression, and meaning, and create change concerning those needs, they might lose something. For example, some worry they will lose a relationship or financial support, or some fear that stepping out of the daily pattern means something bad will happen. Bad things did happen in the past, so they can be quicker to imagine that new relationships or circumstances will go wrong. Not changing may seem like a way of playing it safe. Does the very idea of changing evoke anxiety for you? Exercise 1. Barriers to change. To what extent are the barriers to change described above relevant to you? Place a number between 1 and 5 next to the barriers below. 1 meaning no problem, and 5 meaning a serious problem. I don't feel I deserve to have good feelings about myself, good relationships, and a good life. Spending time in survival brain and coping with threats distracts me from focusing on my personal development. I lack confidence that change is possible. There are people in my life who would not like it if I were to change. I'm anxious about changing. I might lose something, or something bad might happen. Are there any further reactions you have about what seems to get in the way of change? Please pause the audio and complete exercise 1 in the guidebook. Ambivalence concerning change is normal. Before offering you an opportunity to explore what personal development or change means for you, we want to make what we see as an important point. It's normal to feel ambivalent about making important changes in how you think, cope, or meet your needs. But what is meant by ambivalence? Ambivalence means the coexistence of positive and negative feelings towards a situation or action which simultaneously draws a person in opposite directions. It means having mixed feelings about change. In other words, it's very likely that there is a part of you that wants to change and another part of you that wants things to remain the same. We can characterize these different parts of you in any number of ways. For some people, the insight they make into how they were impacted by past trauma is a strong force propelling them towards personal change. Or some people come to see that their thoughts about themselves, others, or life are simply ideas driven by past experience, and they can decide to see things differently. But there will be parts of you or aspects of your relationships that will be resistant to change. For example, traumatic core beliefs, discussed in later chapters, are deep rooted and they do not want to change. And some people find the notion of change very difficult because they don't feel they deserve to have something better or different. Change can be exciting. It is also normally uncomfortable or scary. Perhaps the simplest and most compelling way to understand the experience of ambivalence is to consider how pain works. There was a moment during a Louis Theroux documentary called Heroin Town, in which Louis is speaking to a recovering heroin addict named Mickey Watson. Mickey has been clean from heroin for many months and spends time trying to help addicts who are still using. At one point, Louis says something like, "It must be frustrating. How do you go about convincing people to stop using heroin?" Mickey shrugs and says, "When the pain of changing seems less than the pain of remaining the same, that's when you'll change." Even though this conversation centered on the issue of heroin addiction, This point of view seems to capture the experience of ambivalence as applied to all manner of issues. We do not mention the complexities of ambivalence to elicit pessimism. Despite the experience of ambivalence, we have seen many people change their relationship with themselves, others, or life. And these changes do not have to be objectively large to be important or positive. We mention the issue of ambivalence because it's essential for individuals to be realistic and compassionate with themselves about the very real challenges of creating change. The impact of complex childhood trauma is normally profound, and recovery is best thought of as a progressive, ongoing, and lifelong process, not something you do in a few months. What does recovery mean to you? As mentioned in the introduction, the Historical Trauma Program supports principles of mental health recovery. The idea of recovery for individuals experiencing mental health difficulties began to gain ground in the 1980s. This was a movement that developed in part as a reaction to so called medical models of mental health provision. The recovery model was not just advanced by certain clinicians, but in many ways was driven by consumers of mental health services who had their own views about the sort of help and collaboration that was needed. The recovery approach sees people with mental health difficulties as active participants in the process of change and development rather than patients who simply get treated by experts. Also, recovery from mental health difficulties is seen as a personal journey rather than a set of outcomes determined by a particular time frame, diagnosis, or prognosis. Recovery is not about finding a cure. Recovery emphasizes the ongoing personal development of an individual. The recovery model also emphasizes the social nature of the individual's mental health difficulties. Such difficulties must be seen in the context of the individual's relationships and the lives they are trying to develop. This will have to take into account the individual's needs, sense of identity, aspirations, unique talents, and personal projects. If notions of cure and treatments by experts are de emphasized within the recovery model, what is emphasized? Several themes and principles have been highlighted as important to supporting recovery. In 2004, over 110 panelists participated in developing mental health recovery principles, including clinicians, mental health consumers, family members, providers, advocates, researchers, academicians, and others. This group suggested that recovery principles include hope, empowerment, respect, peer support, and self direction. In addition, support to the individual seeking help must be individualized and person centered, holistic, nonlinear, and strengths based. The recovery model also emphasizes the individual's capacity to know what is needed for their development. With this in mind, recovery will mean different things to each individual. People we have worked with have answered the question, what does recovery mean to you, in a variety of ways. Quote, it means that I can focus on my work and my family without feeling so angry or getting messed up in my head about the past. End quote. Pete. Quote, recovery means not hurting myself and not letting other people hurt me either. It means liking myself. End quote. Molly. Quote, it means being able to do what I want without feeling anxious or worrying about getting a panic attack. End quote. Brandon. It means that I wouldn't hate the world. It would mean that I could see life as being good or having beauty. End quote. Ryan. Quote, recovery would mean that I can have a relationship with someone I feel close to and who doesn't hurt me. End quote. Shelley. Exercise 2. What does recovery mean to you? Below is an opportunity for you to answer this question. Some individuals discover an answer that comes straight to mind and that they feel confident about. Others are unsure and perhaps need time to let the question percolate like a pot of coffee being brewed. One individual said, quote, I came up with an answer straight away, but I wasn't too sure about it. I found myself thinking about the question over the next few days. One morning, I woke up and a different answer came to my mind, and I thought, that's it. That's what recovery means to me. End quote. So, what does recovery mean to you? Please pause the audio and complete exercise 2. The very personal and relative meaning of change. The commitment and time and emotion you are making to this program is substantial. Most people doing this program have to encounter more anxiety to get themselves through it. We assume you are doing this because you are fed up with the difficulties you struggle with and you want a better relationship with yourself and a more fulfilling life. In short, you are here because you want change. In a moment, you will have another opportunity to explore what change means to you in more detail. However, we want to make a couple of points for your consideration. First, what constitutes change is very personal. Recall for a moment the discussion on Abraham Maslow's hierarchy of needs from a previous chapter. The change you want in your life will relate to your needs for safety and security, love and belonging, self-esteem, and self-expression and meaning. However, the way you relate to these universal needs will be unique. Second, what constitutes important change is relative. There is no correct amount of change. We have seen individuals make what would appear to be big changes, such as leaving a destructive relationship, falling in love and beginning a healthy relationship for the first time, making allegations to the authorities about past abuse, being accepted onto further education, interviewing and landing an important job, and so on. However, we have seen others make changes that may not appear big, but are in fact giant for those individuals. It all depends on where you are starting from concerning your confidence and how disturbing your past is for you. Staying off drugs, going to a social event, or just learning to talk to yourself in a caring way can feel very significant for some. Mary Ann is a good example. Physically and emotionally abused by her mother and father, and then sexually assaulted on more than one occasion as an adult, she entered therapy in a very bad state. She was socially isolated, clinically depressed, socially phobic, and unemployed for the past 5 years, and her confidence was near zero. As therapy progressed, she formed an idea of something that was important to her. She wanted to go bodyboarding. Going bodyboarding with a friend was one of the few happy memories she had from childhood, and doing that on her own just seemed important. She was terrified. It meant being in the public eye and doing something she wasn't confident about. She also decided she was going to wear a bathing suit. This worried her because past abuse left her with a very poor body image, and she imagined she would feel exposed and vulnerable. So, for Mary Ann, going bodyboarding was about a lot more than going bodyboarding. It represented much that was important concerning her needs and recovering from the impact of past events. After several weeks of group therapy, she finally managed to do it. Quote, "It was about as bad as I thought it was going to be. I only slept for about an hour the night before, and I had a nightmare as well. When I got into the water, there were a lot of people around, and my heart was going so fast I thought I might have a panic attack, but I forced myself to do it. My target was to stay in for 10 minutes, but when I got to 10 minutes, I was starting to calm down and I was focusing more on bodyboarding than the other people. I don't know how long I was in the water for, but I only came out because I got so cold my hands were starting to turn blue," end quote, said with a big grin. To most people who don't understand the effects of historical trauma, going bodyboarding may not seem like much of an achievement. For Marianne, it was. Where does confidence come from? Well, it can come from the positives and encouragement we get from others, something that was deficient for many who experienced childhood harm. But confidence is also a product of having some success. Even smaller successes can build confidence, which sets you up for further success. This is a positive cycle, quite the opposite of a vicious cycle. Below you have an opportunity to write about what might constitute change for you. We will rely on Abraham Maslow and core human needs to guide this exercise. The principles to keep in mind are: 1. You are not an object. You are a subject, and so you are free to determine your life in some manner. Thank you, Sartre. 2. If past abuse or neglect gave you the idea that you can't control your circumstances or direct your future, learned helplessness, you can stick two fingers, British, or one finger, North Americans, up to that notion. Thank you, Seligman. 3. Change is personal and relative to your starting point today. It's up to you and no one else to decide. Thank you, Marianne. Exercise 3. Exploring what change means for you. One way to explore change is to think about it relative to the core human needs Maslow described. You have an opportunity to do this below. However, don't feel you need to be limited to this approach. You can explore how you want to create change in your life in whatever way works for you. Please pause the audio and complete Exercise 3 in the guidebook. 3 encouraging thoughts. We leave you with a few encouraging thoughts. First, here's an interesting question. How should you evaluate your progress in creating change in yourself and life? Many believe the only way to evaluate progress is by looking at outcomes. Did you achieve what you set out to achieve? Of course, this is one way to think about it. However, we think it's often more important to consider the process of attempting to change. It's what you did along the way, not the result. We remember Mark, a young man who was very socially anxious and had a poor sense of self. He had wanted to ask a girl out, something he had never done before, and we encouraged him to try. He arrived at one session dejected and depressed. He'd asked a girl out, and he'd been shot down. The outcome was not good, no getting around that. However, the process, asking her out, was amazing for a guy who had been abandoned by both parents and suffered abuse and neglect in a series of foster homes. No matter what the outcomes of your efforts to create a better life for yourself, there is real value in giving yourself credit for the process or attempts made at getting your needs met. One feature of the program's final chapter is the opportunity to reflect on the change you may experience while doing this program. As you work your way through this program, we suggest keeping your eye on the process of trying to make changes at least as much as outcomes. Your efforts are important, no matter what they lead to. Second, you don't need to wait for anyone else to tell you how or when you should begin working at change. You don't need anybody's permission to start creating changes in your life. Third, some individuals can feel worried about stepping out of the pattern they know so well, no matter how painful or unrewarding that pattern might be. However, most attempts at change are not an all or nothing deal. Thinking or acting differently, or making a decision, can be thought of as a way of experimenting with change. See what happens. If it clearly doesn't work or makes things worse, you can stop and experiment in another way. For some, it's a process of experimenting with change and all the misfires that lead to important discoveries. This ends the audio for the chapter on What Does Recovery Mean to You?